Welcome to D.G. Yuengling & Son, America's oldest brewery.
Well, our company got started in 1829 by my great-great-grandfather who emigrated here from Württemberg, Germany. So we have quite a history of brewing in our family. Every member of the family, as time went on, every generation, someone stepped forward and was always interested in running the plant.
When David G. Yuengling founded what was first called the Eagle Brewery, he chose Pottsville, Pennsylvania for its varied natural resources, like the springs that bubbled with pure mineral water, and the caves that in the age before refrigeration would keep the fermenting beer cool. Today, the company's run by the fifth and sixth generation of Yuenglings. The original brewery is on the Registry of National Historic Places, but the company's main production operates in a state-of-the-art facility built in 2001. The entire operation is monitored through the computerized command unit.
This is the control room for the brew house. Every vessel, every valve in the brew house can be seen on this computer screen. One operator runs this whole brew house.
Yuengling makes 7 different types of beer, including their top seller, lager. The process for making lager begins with dried, germinated grains called malt.
Right now, we're transferring malt up this line, and it's coming through this pipe right here, and it's going up to this receiver.
The malt ends up in a mill, which can grind 250,000 pounds at a time. The malt is transferred to a mash tun, where it's mixed with boiled, pulverized corn known as grits.
In this vessel, we have about 13,000 pounds of grits and about 1,000 pounds of malt.
The hot grits raise the temperature of the mash, releasing enzymes that break down the starches into fermentable sugars.
1 degree of difference in the mash vessel will actually give you quite a bit of difference in alcohol content or non-fermentable sugar content in the finished product.
From there, it's transferred to a lauter tun, a filtering device that separates the mash from the liquid formed by the fermentable sugars called the wort. The wort is boiled for 90 minutes before a key ingredient is added: hops.
Right now, Kevin's adding the hopping.
Once the wort is injected with yeast, it's transferred to the 36,000-gallon fermentation tank.
What that is CO2 being produced from the fermentation. This fermentation was started about 30 hours ago, so right now it is in just about its most active state.
The beer is cooled, carbonated, aged for 2 weeks, then quality tested. Now it's ready to be bottled.
Here the bottles are being released from the filler, having already been filled. They are being transferred to the crowner, where the crown is applied and they are conveyed down the conveyor. Filler runs approximately 900 bottles per minute. In an 8-hour period, that's about 18,000 cases of beer.
The bottled beer is then loaded for shipping.
This fella here, the unloader, is called Hans. This fellow, the loader here, is called Franz. These are automatic robots that will unload the kegs from the incoming pallets and also reload the finished product onto pallets for loading into the truck or into the cold room.
With the beer brewed, bottled, capped, loaded, and shipped, there is one final step for the brewmaster.
And at the end of the day, it's time for a fine lager.
Yuengling's longevity is certainly unique among American breweries. But the story of its founder, young German immigrant Strikesit-Rich Brewing Beer, is anything but rare. When Yuengling was founded in 1829, the explosion of German brewers was just getting started. By 1868, there were more than 1,300 local brewers operating in the U.S., up more than 50% from 10 years earlier. And one place in particular became the center of it all. A little town on the western shore of Lake Michigan named for an Indian word meaning the good land, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. In a rapidly expanding nation, Milwaukee was also closer to the west, near transportation lines and surrounded by fresh water and farmland for grain. It was a perfect location for brewing.
Out of Milwaukee came really larger breweries that have lasted up into the present.
Breweries were being led by tough-minded, forward-thinking German immigrants like Frederick Pabst, Frederick Miller, and Joseph Schlitz.
They're huge now, but they started small. And what really led these breweries forward into the future was really drive. I mean, these guys wanted to build empires for themselves and for their families. These guys had the classic American mindset, go big.
Joseph Schlitz got his start in 1856 when he married the widow of a brewery owner where he worked as a bookkeeper. Steamship Captain Frederick Pabst also married into the business, wedding the daughter of Jacob Best, a local brewer, in 1862. And then there was Frederick Miller, far from your typical greenhorn.
Frederick Miller came from Germany. He was educated in France. He came from a very well-to-do family.
Miller arrived in New York with $9,000 in gold. That's almost $200,000 today. Miller had been a successful brewer in Germany, at one point brewing under the royal seal. According to legend, he hand-carried his special brewing yeast with him all the way from Germany, and then spent a year searching for the right place to start his American brewing business. In 1855, he brewed his first barrel of lager in Milwaukee. By the 1860s, Miller, Pabst, and Schlitz were all in a spirited struggle for Milwaukee's thirsty patrons.
In the mid-19th century, there's this joke that used to be told about Milwaukee that every sink in every household had 3 faucets, one for hot water, one for cold, and one for beer.
There's been competition from day one. These guys were looking to beat each other on their home turf. They'd be happy if they had a tavern 2 or 3 blocks from the other guy's brewery that carried their beer. It was sort of like a little, to the other brewer. And these guys were like the steel barons and railroad barons. It was the same sort of mindset. I want it all, and each of them did.
When Schlitz began using the slogan, "The beer that made Milwaukee famous," Pabst came up with a proudly contrary slogan of its own. Milwaukee beer is famous. Pabst has made it so. Pabst may have been right. In 1893, it became the first brewery in the nation to sell 1 million barrels of beer in a single year. But while Schlitz, Miller, and Pabst were fighting it out in Milwaukee, another brewing baron was rising up in St. Louis, who would change the history of American beer forever. Beginning in the mid-1600s, Harvard had an on-campus brewery that supplied beer to students. The practice continued for more than a century.